The stench of whiskey and gunpowder filled the air as Piper Adams cowered beneath the saloon table, her eyes wide with terror. Outside, the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, Colorado, had erupted into chaos when her father lost his final hand of poker to the most dangerous man in the territory. The year was 1876, and in this unforgiving corner of the American frontier, a man's word was his bond, even when that word included wagering his own daughter. "Pa, please!" Piper screamed as rough hands yanked her from her hiding place. Her honey-colored hair tumbled from its pins, framing her tear-streaked face. At 19, she had seen her share of hardship, but nothing had prepared her for this betrayal. The saloon fell silent as Jasper, the viper Thornton, tightened his grip on her arm. His yellowed teeth gleamed through his salt and pepper beard as he leered at his newest acquisition. "You're mine now, girl. Your pa made sure of that. Let her go." The batwing doors of the saloon crashed open, silhouetting a broad-shouldered figure against the setting sun. The man stepped forward, spurs jingling with each purposeful stride, his hand hovering near the Colt revolver strapped to his thigh. The crowd parted as Hayes Everett moved toward the center of the room, his piercing blue eyes fixed on Thornton. "This ain't your business, Everett," Thornton spat, pulling Piper closer. "I'm making it my business." Hayes's voice was quiet but carried an edge sharp as a Bowie knife. A woman isn't property to be gambled away. Piper's father, Thomas Adams, slumped in his chair, too deep in his cups to defend even himself, let alone his daughter. The debt. I had no choice. "There's always a choice," Hayes replied, without taking his eyes off Thornton. "And I'm giving you one now. Let her go." Thornton laughed, the sound grating like metal on stone. "Or what? You'll outdraw me? We both know you're fast, Everett, but are you willing to risk it all for some stranger's daughter?" The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Piper's heart hammered against her ribs as she looked between the two men. Hayes Everett was legend in these parts, a former Texas Ranger turned bounty hunter, whose skill with a gun was matched only by his unwavering sense of justice. But even legends could bleed. "I won't ask again," Hayes said, his stance shifting subtly. Thornton's face twisted with rage. With a sudden movement, he shoved Piper into the arms of one of his men and reached for his weapon. Hayes's draw was lightning fast, the report of his revolver deafening in the confined space. Thornton howled as the bullet tore through his shooting arm. In the ensuing chaos, Piper fought against her captor's grip. Hayes crossed the room in 3 strides, his fist connecting with the man's jaw. As the thug crumpled, Piper found herself free but surrounded by Thornton's angry gang. "Run!" Hayes commanded, grabbing her hand. They burst through the back door of the saloon and into the alley beyond. Shots rang out behind them, splintering wood mere inches from their heads. Hayes led her to where his stallion, Tempest, was hitched. In one fluid motion, he lifted Piper onto the horse and swung up behind her. The animal took off at a gallop, thundering down the main street and out of town. Thornton's furious voice followed them. "She belongs to me, Everett. I won her fair and square." Hayes glanced over his shoulder at the men mounting up to follow. "Hold on tight," he told Piper, urging Tempest to an even faster pace. One of Thornton's men managed to get ahead, blocking their path. He raised his rifle, but Hayes was quicker, drawing his weapon and firing in one smooth movement. The man tumbled from his horse, clutching his shoulder. "You can't have her. She's mine," Hayes called back to Thornton, who was still struggling to mount his horse one-handed. With a grim smile, Hayes spurred Tempest onward, carrying the crying girl away from the town and into the wilderness beyond. They rode hard until the sun disappeared behind the jagged peaks of the Rockies. Only when Hayes was certain they weren't being followed did he slow Tempest to a walk, finally stopping beside a clear stream where the horse could drink. Piper slid from the saddle, her legs trembling with exhaustion and fear. She stumbled, and Hayes caught her arm to steady her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "No," Piper replied, finding her voice at last. "But why did you do that? Why risk your life for me? And what did you mean back there? That I'm yours?" Hayes knelt by the stream, splashing water on his face before answering. "I meant nothing by it except to keep Thornton's filthy hands off you. And as for why," he shrugged, Some things a man just can't abide. Trading a woman like she's cattle is one of them. But now you're in danger too. Thornton won't let this go. I reckon not. Hayes stood, his tall frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. But I've dealt with worse than Jasper, Thornton. He studied her face. Where's your mother? Died of fever 3 winters ago. Any other family? Piper shook her head. None that would take me in. Pa, well, he hasn't been the same since Ma passed. The drinking got worse and then the gambling. Hayes nodded, understanding in his eyes. We'll figure something out. For now, we need to make camp. It'll be dark soon. As Hayes busied himself gathering firewood, Piper watched him. His movements were efficient, practiced. Though he couldn't be much past 30, there was a weariness to him that spoke of a hard life lived on the edge of civilization. Yet there was gentleness, too, in the way he spoke to his horse, in how he had risked everything for a stranger. Thank you, she said softly as he returned with an armful of kindling. Hayes met her gaze. Don't thank me yet, Miss Adams. We've got a long way to go. Call me Piper, please. Piper, he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her heart skip a beat. I'm Hayes Everett. I know who you are. Everyone in Colorado Territory knows the man who brought in the Walker gang. A shadow crossed his face. That was a lifetime ago. They ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack that Hayes produced from his saddlebags. As the fire crackled between them, Piper found herself studying his face in the flickering light, the strong jaw dusted with stubble, the scar that bisected his left eyebrow, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he almost smiled. Where will we go? She asked when the silence stretched too long. I have a friend who runs a trading post about 2 days' ride from here. We'll head there. Figure out our next move. Hayes tossed another stick onto the fire. Thornton's reach is long, but even he won't risk crossing into Ute territory for vengeance. And after that, Hayes gave her a long look. One step at a time, Piper. For now, you should rest. We'll leave at first light. He offered her his bedroll, but Piper insisted they share it when she saw him preparing to sleep on the bare ground. With reluctance, Hayes agreed, positioning himself as far from her as the narrow bedroll would allow. Piper lay awake long after Hayes's breathing had deepened into sleep, her mind replaying the day's events. By all rights, she should be terrified alone in the wilderness with a man she barely knew, pursued by one of the most dangerous outlaws in the territory. Yet somehow, lying next to Hayes Everett with the vast canopy of stars overhead, she felt safer than she had in years. Dawn broke in a symphony of birdsong. Piper woke to find Hayes already up, brewing coffee in a battered tin pot. His hair, the color of sun-bleached wheat, was damp from washing in the stream. Morning, he said, handing her a cup of the strong, bitter brew. We should get moving. Thornton's men could still be tracking us. They rode double again, Piper seated in front of Hayes, acutely aware of his arms around her as he held the reins. The mountain landscape was breathtaking, sweeping vistas of pine forests and meadows bursting with wildflowers, the occasional glimpse of antelope or elk in the distance. By midday, they had climbed higher into the mountains, following game trails that Piper would have missed entirely had she been alone. Hayes seemed to know these mountains intimately, guiding Tempest with confidence through terrain that would have daunted most riders. How do you know this country so well? Piper asked during a brief stop to rest the horse. I trapped up here for a while, after I left the Rangers. Hayes's gaze swept the horizon. There's peace in these mountains that you don't find in towns. Is that why you became a bounty hunter? To stay away from towns? A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Partly, and partly because it's what I'm good at. He shrugged. A man has to earn his keep somehow. It must be lonely? Hayes didn't answer, but something in his expression made Piper's heart ache. She had the sudden urge to reach out, to touch his face, to smooth away the lines of solitude etched there by years of wandering. Instead, she busied herself adjusting her skirt, which had bunched uncomfortably during the ride. We should keep moving, Hayes said, helping her back onto Tempest. As they continued their journey, Piper found herself leaning back against his solid chest, drawing comfort from his presence. That night, they made camp in a sheltered ravine. Hayes set snares and returned an hour later with 2 rabbits, which he skinned and spitted over the fire with practiced ease. The fresh meat was a welcome change from jerky, and Piper savored every bite. "Tell me about yourself," she said as they watched the flames dance. "How does a Texas Ranger end up in Colorado?" Hayes was quiet for so long that Piper thought he might not answer. "I grew up on a small ranch outside San Antonio," he finally said. "Joined the Rangers when I was 20. Spent 8 years tracking outlaws along the border." "What happened?" "The war happened. Everything changed. When I came back, the Rangers weren't what they had been." His jaw tightened. "And neither was I." Piper sensed there was more to the story, but Hayes' tone made it clear he wouldn't elaborate. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Hayes nodded, accepting her sympathy without comment. "What about you? You always live in Redemption Creek?" "No, we had a farm near Denver before Ma died. Pa sold it to pay off debts, and we've been drifting since." Piper poked at the fire with a stick. "I was planning to leave soon anyway. Find work as a teacher perhaps, or in a dress shop." "You have schooling?" "Ma taught me, and I had 2 years at a ladies' at seminary in Denver before—" She trailed off, the memory of being pulled out of school when the money ran out still painful. "That's good," Hayes said. "Means you have options." "More than most women out here. If I can get away from Thornton." "You will." The certainty in Hayes' voice was comforting. "I give you my word." They fell asleep that night with less distance between them, the shared bedroll no longer seeming quite so awkward. Piper drifted off to the sound of Hayes' heartbeat, steady and strong beneath her cheek. The next morning dawned cloudy, with the promise of rain in the air. They packed up quickly and continued their journey. By midday the sky had opened up, soaking them both, despite Hayes' oilskin coat, which he insisted Piper wear. They were descending a steep slope when Tempest lost his footing on the slick ground. The horse whinnied in alarm as he slid several feet before catching himself. Hayes tightened his hold on Piper, preventing her from being thrown, but the sudden movement wrenched his shoulder. "Are you all right?" Piper asked, feeling him stiffen behind her. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "Just an old injury acting up." They found shelter in a shallow cave, where Hayes built a small fire despite the dampness of the available wood. As they huddled close to the meager warmth, Piper noticed him rubbing his shoulder, his face tight with pain. "Let me see," she said, moving to kneel beside him. Hayes started to protest, but fell silent when she fixed him with a stern look. With reluctance, he unbuttoned his shirt enough to expose his left shoulder. Piper gasped at the sight of the ugly scar that marred his skin, a puckered starburst just below his collarbone. "Comanche arrow, 8 years ago," Hayes explained, watching her face. "Healed clean, but it pains me in wet weather." Without thinking, Piper placed her palm against the scar, her touch gentle. Hayes went very still, his eyes darkening as they met hers. For a long moment, neither of them moved or spoke. Then Piper realized what she was doing and snatched her hand away, her cheeks burning. I should check if our clothes are drying," she stammered, scrambling to her feet. Hayes let her go, but his eyes followed her across the small cave. Something had shifted between them, something neither was ready to acknowledge. The rain continued through the night and into the next morning. They were forced to remain in the cave, their supplies dwindling. Hayes ventured out briefly and returned with a grouse he had managed to bring down with a well-aimed stone. The bird was small, but it provided enough meat for a modest meal. As they sat side by side, watching the rain beyond the cave mouth, Hayes surprised Piper by asking, "What would you do if you could choose any life for yourself?" Piper considered the question. "I'd like a home," she said finally. "Not grand, just mine. Perhaps a small school where I could teach children, books, a garden." She glanced at him shyly. "It sounds simple, I know." "Simple isn't bad," Hayes replied, his voice soft. "Those sound like good dreams. What about you, if you weren't hunting bounties?" Hayes was silent for a long time. "There was a time I thought about having land again. Building something that would last." He shook his head. "But that was before." "Before what?" "Before I learned that some men aren't meant for peace." His tone was final, brooking no further questions. The rain finally stopped late that afternoon. They set out immediately, hoping to make up for lost time. The trading post was still a day's ride away, according to Hayes, but they might reach it by nightfall if they pushed hard. They had been riding for several hours when Hayes suddenly reined in Tempest, his body tensing. Piper started to ask what was wrong, but he placed a warning finger against her lips, his eyes scanning the tree line ahead. That's when Piper saw them 4 riders emerging from the trees, spreading out to block the trail. Even at this distance, she recognized Thornton's second in command, a brutal man known only as Reeves. "How did they find us?" she whispered. "Doesn't matter now," Hayes replied, his voice grim. He assessed their options quickly. "Hold on tight." Before Piper could respond, Hayes wheeled Tempest around and spurred him toward a narrow game trail that branched off to their right. The stallion responded instantly, leaping forward with renewed energy despite the long day's ride. Shouts erupted behind them, followed by the thunder of hooves. Hayes guided Tempest through the dense forest with remarkable skill, but their pursuers were gaining. A shot rang out, the bullet splintering bark from a tree inches from Hayes's head. "Down!" Hayes commanded, and Piper pressed herself against Tempest's neck as more shots followed. They burst from the trees into a small clearing, only to find their path blocked by a rushing creek, swollen from the recent rains. Hayes hesitated for only a second before urging Tempest into the water. The current was swift, but not deep enough to sweep them away, and the horse fought his way across to the opposite bank. As they clambered up the muddy slope, Piper heard a cry of pain. She turned to see Hayes clutching his side, his face ashen. "You're hit!" "It's nothing," he said, though his voice was strained. "Just a graze." Before she could argue, more shots rang out from the other side of the creek. Their pursuers had reached the water's edge but seemed reluctant to cross the swift current. Hayes seized the opportunity to put more distance between them. They rode hard, the forest growing denser around them. Eventually, the sounds of pursuit faded, but Hayes didn't slow their pace until Tempest began to stumble with exhaustion. They found a small hollow surrounded by thick undergrowth that would conceal them from casual observation. Hayes slid from the saddle, wincing as his boots hit the ground. Piper dismounted quickly and moved to his side, steadying him when he swayed. "Let me see," she insisted, helping him remove his coat and shirt. The graze was more serious than Hayes had admitted. The bullet had carved a deep furrow across his ribs, and though it hadn't lodged in his body, the wound was bleeding freely. "We need to stop the bleeding," Piper said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the fear that gripped her. She tore strips from her petticoat and used them to bind the wound as best she could. Hayes watched her work, his breathing shallow. "You're good at this," he observed. "Ma taught me. Said every woman should know how to tend wounds in a land where doctors are scarce." Piper tied off the makeshift bandage. "It needs proper cleaning and stitching." "We'll be at the trading post by tomorrow," Hayes said, struggling to put his shirt back on. "My friend's wife has healing skills." "If we make it that far," Piper murmured, glancing nervously in the direction they had come. "We'll make it," Hayes assured her, though the pallor of his face belied his confidence. They didn't dare risk a fire that night. Huddled together for warmth, they shared the last of their jerky and hardtack. Hayes insisted on taking the first watch despite his injury, and Piper was too exhausted to argue. She fell asleep with her head on his good shoulder, his arm protectively around her. When she woke, the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten. Hayes was slumped beside her, his face flushed with fever. Alarmed, Piper placed a hand on his forehead and found it burning hot. "Hayes!" she called softly, shaking his shoulder. "Hayes, wake up." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. "Piper," he rasped, recognition dawning. "Sorry, must have dozed off." "You're burning with fever, the wound." "We need to move," he interrupted, struggling to sit upright. "Thornton's men could be close." "You're in no condition to ride." Hayes fixed her with a steely gaze. "We don't have a choice. The trading post is our only hope." With Piper's help, Hayes managed to get to his feet and mount Tempest. She climbed up behind him this time, supporting his weight as they set off. Hayes directed her, his voice growing weaker as the morning wore on. By midday, he was leaning heavily against her, barely conscious. "Just over that ridge," he mumbled, pointing ahead. "Samuel's post." Piper urged Tempest forward, praying Hayes was right. As they crested the ridge, she nearly wept with relief at the sight of a sturdy log building nestled in the valley below. smoke curling from its chimney. They had almost reached the trading post when Hayes slumped forward, unconscious. Piper struggled to keep him in the saddle as Tempest picked his way down the slope. When they reached level ground, she called out desperately, "Help! Please! Someone help us!" The door of the trading post flew open, and a large man with a bushy beard emerged, a rifle in his hands. His suspicious expression quickly changed to concern when he saw Hayes. "Sweet Jesus!" he exclaimed, lowering his weapon and rushing forward. "That's Hayes Everett." "He's been shot," Piper explained, as the man helped ease Hayes from the saddle. "The wound is infected." "Martha," the man bellowed toward the cabin, "get a bed ready and your medicines. It's Hayes, and he's bad hurt." A woman appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Upon seeing Hayes, she rushed back inside to prepare. The man, Samuel, Piper presumed, carried Hayes as if he weighed nothing, striding quickly toward the cabin. "Who are you?" he asked Piper over his shoulder. "Piper Adams. Hayes saved me from a man named Thornton. His men are tracking us." Samuel's face darkened. "Jasper Thornton? That explains a lot. Don't worry, miss. You're safe here. Thornton doesn't dare come this far into Ute territory." Inside, the trading post was warm and surprisingly spacious. Martha, a handsome woman with streaks of silver in her dark hair, directed Samuel to place Hayes on a bed in a small room off the main area. She immediately set to work, cutting away the bloodied bandages with practiced efficiency. "Infection set in," she announced grimly. "I'll need to clean the wound thoroughly and stitch it. Samuel, get me hot water and the medicine box, and find something clean for this poor girl to wear. She's dead on her feet." Piper hadn't realized how exhausted she was until Martha mentioned it. She swayed slightly and Samuel guided her to a chair by the fire. "Rest," he told her kindly. "Martha's the best healer in these parts. If anyone can save Hayes, she can." Hours passed in a blur. Piper bathed and changed into a dress Martha provided, then sat beside Hayes as Martha worked to save his life. The older woman cleaned the wound with a strong smelling liquid that made Hayes moan even in his unconscious state, then carefully stitched the edges together with a bone needle and catgut thread. "Now we wait," Martha said, wiping her brow. "The fever needs to break or—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Piper understood. If the infection had spread too far, not even Martha's skills would be enough. For 3 days, Hayes hovered between life and death. Piper rarely left his side, bathing his face with cool water, helping Martha change the poultices on his wound, and spooning broth between his cracked lips when he was lucid enough to swallow. On the morning of the 4th day, Piper woke from a doze in the chair beside Hayes's bed to find him watching her, his eyes clear for the first time since they had arrived. "You're still here?" he said, his voice hoarse but stronger than it had been. Relief flooded through her. "Where else would I be?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Running far away from the trouble I've brought you." "You saved my life," Piper reminded him, reaching for his hand. "More than once." Hayes's fingers tightened around hers. "Thank you for not leaving me." "Never," Piper promised, and realized with startling clarity that she meant it. Martha pronounced Hayes out of danger later that day, though she insisted he remain in bed for at least another week to regain his strength. Samuel kept watch for Thornton's men, but there was no sign of pursuit. As Hayes had predicted, even Thornton was not foolish enough to venture into territory protected by the Ute. As Hayes recovered, Piper learned more about his friendship with Samuel and Martha Weaver. They had saved his life once before, when he had stumbled onto their homestead, half dead from a knife wound received while capturing a notorious cattle rustler. That had been 5 years ago, and the Weavers had since established the trading post, which served trappers, prospectors, and the occasional Ute hunting party. "Hayes helped us build this place," Samuel told Piper one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Stayed a whole summer. Martha was convinced he might settle nearby, maybe even take a Ute wife. There was a chief's daughter who had her eye on him." Samuel chuckled. "But the wanderlust took him again, as it always does." "He told me he doesn't believe he's meant for peace," Piper said softly. Samuel's expression grew serious. "Hayes carries ghosts with him, things he saw and did during the war and after. But a man can only run for so long before he has to face what haunts him." Piper thought about this as she tended to Hayes that evening. He was sitting up now, some color returned to his face. though he tired easily. She had been reading to him from one of Martha's books, a volume of Tennyson's poetry that Piper had discovered with delight among the weaver's modest library. "Samuel says you helped build this place," she said during a pause in their reading. Hayes nodded. "It was good work, honest work. Yet you left." His eyes met hers, searching. "I did. Why?" Hayes was silent for a long moment. "There's blood on my hands, Piper. Not all of it deserved to be spilled. The war, some from the war, some from after." He looked away. "I've killed men for bounty. Not all of them were as evil as the wanted posters claimed." Piper set the book aside and moved to sit on the edge of his bed. "The past is the past. What matters is the man you are now." "And what kind of man is that?" Hayes asked, a bitter edge to his voice. "The kind who risked his life for a stranger, who would rather be hurt himself than see harm come to others." Piper took his hand, tracing the calluses on his palm. "The kind of man I've come to care for very deeply." Hayes stared at her, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. For a moment, Piper thought he might pull away, retreat behind the walls he had built around himself. Instead, he raised their joined hands to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "You deserve better than a broken bounty hunter," he murmured. "Let me decide what I deserve," Piper replied softly. Their gazes held, the moment stretching between them like a thread of gold catching the last light of day. Then Martha called from the kitchen that supper was ready, breaking the spell. The days that followed took on a rhythm of their own. Hayes grew stronger, able to walk short distances and sit on the porch to enjoy the mountain air. Piper helped Martha with household tasks and discovered a talent for baking that made Samuel declare her sourdough biscuits better than any this side of the Mississippi. Throughout it all, something deepened between Piper and Hayes, a quiet understanding, a connection that went beyond words. They never spoke directly of that moment in his sick room, but Piper often caught Hayes watching her with an expression that made her heart race. 2 weeks after their arrival, Samuel returned from a trip to the nearest settlement with news. Jasper Thornton had been arrested by a U.S. Marshal on outstanding charges of robbery and murder in Wyoming territory. The danger, it seemed, had passed. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, Hayes finally spoke of the future. "Samuel's offered me a partnership in the trading post," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Says he's getting too old to manage it alone, especially with the new mine opening up in the next valley. There'll be more trappers and prospectors coming through." Piper's heart leapt, though she tried to keep her voice steady. "Are you considering it?" "I am." Hayes turned to face her, his expression serious. "But I need to know something first." "What's that?" "If I stayed, would you stay too?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibilities. Piper searched his face, finding in it all the answers she needed. "Yes," she said simply. "I would stay." Hayes reached for her hand, drawing her closer. "I can't offer you much, Piper. This life is hard, especially for a woman." "I'm stronger than I look," she reminded him with a small smile. "That you are." His free hand came up to cup her cheek. "Strong and brave, and far too good for the likes of me. But if you'll have me, I swear I'll spend every day trying to deserve you." Piper's heart felt too full for words. Instead, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in answer. Hayes hesitated only a moment before kissing her back, his arms encircling her with a tenderness that belied their strength. When they finally parted, breathless, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. "I think I've been waiting for you my whole life, Piper Adams." "Then it's a good thing you found me," she whispered, "because I don't plan on ever letting you go." 3 months later, as summer gave way to fall, Hayes and Piper were married on the porch of the trading post, with Samuel officiating and Martha weeping happy tears. The ceremony was simple, witnessed only by their friends and a small group of Ute, including the chief whose daughter had once set her cap for Hayes. The chief gave them a gift of finely tanned deerskin, and his blessing, which Samuel assured them was a rare honor. Piper wore a dress of cream-colored calico that Martha had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair, and Hayes's mother's ring rescued from his saddlebag on her finger. Hayes, clean-shaven and solemn in a new shirt, fumbled his vows, but spoke them with such heartfelt sincerity that even Samuel's voice grew husky with emotion. "I promise to protect you, to provide for you, and to love you until my last breath," Hayes said, holding Piper's hands in his. "I never thought I'd find peace in this life, but you've shown me that it's possible. With you, I've found my home." Piper's own vows were equally simple and deeply felt. "I promise to stand by you through whatever comes, to believe in you when you doubt yourself, and to remind you every day that you are worthy of love and happiness. You saved me in more ways than you know, Hayes Everett, and I will love you always." That night, as they lay together in the small cabin Samuel had helped them build near the trading post, Hayes traced the curve of Piper's cheek with a reverent finger. "Do you remember what I said that day we escaped Thornton?" he asked, his voice low in the darkness. "You can't have her. She's mine. I had no right to claim you then." "And now?" Piper asked, pressing closer to him. Hayes smiled, the moonlight through the window catching the rare expression. "Now I'm yours, completely and forever, and you're mine if you choose to be." "I do choose," Piper whispered against his lips. "Every day, I choose you." As winter settled over the mountains, bringing deep snow and long nights, the trading post thrived under the combined efforts of Hayes, Piper, and the weavers. Hayes's reputation as a fair dealer spread among the Ute and the trappers alike, while Piper established a small school for the children of settlers in the nearby valley. 3 days a week, she taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to a dozen eager pupils, fulfilling a dream she had thought lost forever. Spring brought news from Redemption Creek. Thomas Adams, Piper's father, had died during the winter, succumbing finally to the alcohol that had ruled his life for so long. Though Piper grieved, there was a sense of closure in knowing that chapter of her life was truly ended. "Do you want to go back?" Hayes asked as they stood together on their porch, watching the snow melt from the mountainsides. "To settle his affairs or visit his grave?" Piper shook her head. "There's nothing for me there. My life is here now, with you." Hayes pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Still, he was your father." "He was," Piper acknowledged, "and I forgive him. But that doesn't mean I need to revisit the past." She looked up at Hayes, seeing in his eyes understanding and love. "Besides, I have news that makes looking forward much more important than looking back." "What news?" Hayes asked, his brow furrowing. Piper took his hand and placed it on her stomach, still flat but harboring their future. "We're going to have a child." The joy that transformed Hayes's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He lifted Piper off her feet and spun her in a circle, his laughter echoing across the valley. When he set her down, there were tears in his eyes. "A child," he said wonderingly. "Our child." "Are you happy?" Piper asked, though she knew the answer. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," Hayes replied, kissing her with a tenderness that made her toes curl. "You've given me everything I never dared hope for, Piper Everett." Their daughter, Margaret Martha Everett, was born on a crisp autumn day, with Martha serving as midwife, and Samuel pacing the trading post floor nearly as anxiously as Hayes. The baby had her father's blue eyes and her mother's honey-colored hair, and from the moment Hayes first held her in his trembling hands, she owned his heart completely. "She's perfect," he whispered, gazing down at the tiny face. "Just like her mother." As Margaret grew, so did the settlement around the trading post. What had been a remote outpost became a small but thriving community with Hayes and Piper at its heart. The schoolhouse expanded, requiring Piper to hire an assistant teacher. Hayes, with Samuel's blessing, added a sawmill to their operations, providing lumber for new homes and businesses. 3 years after Margaret's birth, Piper gave Hayes a son, whom they named Samuel Thomas Everett Samuel for their friend, and Thomas in a final gesture of forgiveness toward Piper's father. The boy had his father's quiet strength and his mother's quick mind, and from an early age showed a talent for working with animals that surpassed even Hayes's considerable skill. Life in the mountains was never easy. Winters were harsh, and the isolation could be wearing. There were times when supplies ran low, when illness swept through the settlement, when disputes needed mediation. Through it all, Hayes and Piper faced each challenge together, their love deepening with shared struggles and joys. On rare occasions, Hayes still woke in the night, haunted by dreams of his past. In those moments, Piper would hold him close, her presence anchoring him to the present, to the life they had built together. "I used to think men like me didn't get second chances," he confessed to her once, as they lay awake listening to the soft breathing of their children in the next room. "That I'd die with a bullet in my back in some forgotten corner of the territory, with no one to mourn me." "And now?" Piper prompted, running her fingers through his hair, longer now and streaked with silver at the temples. Hayes smiled in the darkness. "Now I know that redemption comes in many forms. Mine came in the shape of a brave young woman who saw something worth saving in a broken man." He pulled her closer. "You saved me, Piper. In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," she corrected gently. "And we keep doing it every day." 10 years after that fateful day in Redemption Creek, the settlement now officially chartered as Everett Springs celebrated the opening of its first proper church. The whitewashed building, with its modest steeple and polished pine pews, stood as testament to how far they had come from the isolated trading post of years past. As they sat together in the front pew, Margaret fidgeting in her Sunday best and young Sam solemnly studying the hymnal, Piper caught Hayes watching her with that same look of wonder he had worn on their wedding day. "What?" she whispered as the congregation rose to sing. Hayes took her hand, his thumb tracing the simple gold band on her finger. "Just thinking about how differently things might have turned out if I hadn't walked into that saloon 10 years ago." "Divine providence," suggested the young minister, who had overheard as he passed by. Hayes smiled, the expression coming easily to him now, after years of happiness. "Maybe so, Reverend, or maybe just the best kind of luck a man ever had." Later that day, as they walked home along the path that wound beside the creek, their children running ahead with the weaver's grandchildren, Hayes stopped Piper with a gentle touch on her arm. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and placed it in her palm. "Happy anniversary." Piper opened the pouch to find a delicate silver locket. Inside was a tiny pencil sketch of their family, Hayes, Piper, Margaret, and Sam, drawn with remarkable skill by one of the miners who had a talent for such things. "Hayes, it's beautiful," she breathed, tears pricking her eyes. He fastened it around her neck, his fingers lingering on the chain. "Not as beautiful as you, not as beautiful as the life you've given me." Piper reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that years of smiling had etched around his eyes. "I love you, Hayes Everett, more with each passing day." "And I love you, Piper Everett," he replied, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness he had shown that first time on the porch of the trading post. "Forever and always." As they walked on toward home, hand in hand, with the mountains rising majestic around them and their children's laughter floating on the breeze, Piper reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a terrified girl being gambled away in a saloon to a respected teacher and beloved wife and mother. From a haunted bounty hunter to a pillar of the community and devoted family man. Their story had begun with danger and desperation. "You can't have her, she's mine," said the cowboy as he carried the crying girl away. But it had blossomed into something neither could have imagined that day. Something enduring and true, built day by day through shared hardship and happiness. Through faith in each other when faith in themselves faltered. And as the sun set behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Piper knew with absolute certainty that this love, this family, this life they had created together was exactly where she was meant to be.